Hello, everyone. My name is Lori Quiller, and welcome to the Air Force Culture and Language Center's Facebook Live event. We're here today with AFCLC's Associate Professor of Regional and Cultural Studies for Africa, Dr. Scott Edmondson, and we would like to invite you to join us in the Air Force's Global Classroom. Before we begin, we ask that you observe a few simple rules. Maintain principles and standards of professional behavior and communication. Mute your mics while others are speaking. Hold your questions until the end of the brief, where you may unmute your mics and ask your questions, or you may enter them into the chat. Follow proper OPSEC procedures and guidance, and remain cognizant that Facebook is an unclassified medium. And with these in mind, let's get started. Dr. Edmundson, thank you so much for joining us today. So,
Lori.
Tell us, how would you define culture and what prompted you to study culture?
Well, the old joke is if you ask two anthropologists what culture is, you won't just get two different answers. You might get 5 or 6 or more. It can be an amorphous or fuzzy concept, and that's okay. We're human beings, not machines, after all. But it's good to address this one first, since sometimes when folks hear culture, might think of ritual or drumming and dancing, and a number of faculty served on a panel to kind of present our teaching and research agendas a while back, and we called it not just puppies and rainbows and drum circles. So culture is more than that, and beyond sort of the critique of liberal arts more generally. Though when it comes to storytelling or literature, art, music, other forms of cultural production, we shouldn't just consider those frivolous things to learn about either. Often they provide some of the greatest insights into culture, and how people see themselves and their place in the world, for example. So not to dismiss that, but the study of culture for our purposes includes those things, but also is a little more comprehensive. When I taught at Fort Bragg, one of the definitions in the Palm Mill Handbook there was, let me just read it to get it right: the belief systems, attitudes, languages, social relationships, institutions, and material goods transmitted within a society. Sometimes that was put in a military acronym of VBBN, or values, behaviors, beliefs, and norms, which is helpful to remember. Sometimes defined kind of more systematically, or society as a system, as a network of social relationships, organized, integrated, and shares a common value system. And those are all, good, workable definitions. To add to the kind of more functionalist take of those, we also have liked to use one from the anthropologist Clifford Geertz, who comes from a more interpretive school of anthropology, who takes culture to be webs of significance that we ourselves have spun, and the analysis of it to be, therefore, not an experimental science in search of law, but an interpretive one in search of meaning. In other words, you can't just find the right variables and put it in the calculator and figure out what it is. You have to engage in a little bit more interpretation, and that's always sort of fascinated me. Everyone has to make a living and make that living matter, and I've always been sort of curious and fascinated about how human beings made meaning, experienced religiosity, the relationship between spiritual and social worlds, and then again, how we communicate via various media and the arts, and their effects in turn, on us, how stories and narratives shape our social lives in powerful ways, and often in ways that we're not, aware of on a daily basis. So that's at least where I come at the study of culture and defining what we're trying to get at.
Well, it's obvious that it's multifaceted and certainly much more than what you would think it would be. So thinking about it that way, why is the study of culture or the diversity between cultures so necessary for today's military?
I think the short answer really is that we live in a diverse and sometimes dizzying world, and if we don't understand it, and most importantly, those living in it, we're not going to do whatever it is we're doing. We're trying to do well, whether military, civilian or otherwise. Without linguistic and cultural competence and, regional knowledge and expertise, the likelihood of being counterproductive simply increases. So if we are to be effective globally, we have to have this, we have to study culture, and we have to be culturally competent. Much as, as the US military, as much as some might like to think that war or conflict is sort of more of a math problem, and that those with the technical superiority just win, it hasn't always borne out that way. And that's not the whole story. The Department of Defense established a lot of its culture centers like ours in the various services in the aftermath of 9/11 and operations in Afghanistan and Iraq, where we thought, it might be good to speak some of these languages and know something about the people and societies we're, fighting amongst and with and against. But I would argue that, in our globalized world, it's never been more important. Cultural competence or cultural understanding or knowledge is not just a matter of of importance for counterinsurgencies. Even in our so-called near peer strategic competition and preparing for the high-end fight, the role of the information environment is obviously increasingly important. As is understanding our partners, our adversaries, or those who may be more ambiguous status, trying to figure all that out. So for the military, it remains important both at the sort of tactical interpersonal level, as we all develop relationships and networks and strengthen the alliances and the partnerships that are necessary, person to person. It remains important to consider the social cultural dynamics with any operational planning. Wars, conflict doesn't happen in a sort of social vacuum. On just a map with grid lines. There are people that live there, and the battlefield is, often also someone's backyard. And so we have to understand that. And there's also a kind of a strategic implication for this, in the development of policy and strategy. If we don't consider the cultures and the societies in which, intends to engage and shape, what chance do we have to really make that successful and durable, sustainable, just? I would say, if we aren't culturally competent, we don't have much of a chance with that. So it's not just a kind of a nice to have, but really more of a requirement, from the tactical to the strategic levels. Yeah.
So Chief of Staff of the Air Force, General Brown, has highlighted interoperability as the key for successful military missions. And thinking about how culture fits into that, how can the culture training and expertise positively impact that interoperability?
Yeah, and as General Brown has rightly said, expanding and improving interoperability is a crucial component of our national security. And developing these partnerships, strengthening these alliances and coalitions is not done well in a hurry,
right,
overnight, or after the emergency has occurred, nor is the professional development of our airmen of creating a cross-culturally competent force sort of a short-term prospect, which is, required again to enable these strategic partnerships and alliances. So again, everyone working with foreign partners needs this to be successful, and it may look different depending upon one's role or specialty. For example, the public affairs or the information operations officer may need to study, media and narrative
Mhm.
construction more. But every security force or maintenance crew needs to be able to work with and be interoperable, with a diverse range of partners, and that includes within our own military, among the various services, and across the U.S. Interagency. And this could look like, just kind of in concrete terms, survival language training, or it could be, more general courses in cultural competence to kind of think through in general how to prepare and succeed at intercultural engagement, beyond the kind of do's and don'ts about, don't shake with the left and don't show the soles of your feet and that kind of thing. So again, some of it is what we call more culture general, that everyone needs, and some is more culture specific and tailored even to the job and the rank or the specialty. Our Air Force and our military more broadly is not a monolith and is not made up of automatons. At least it shouldn't be. If we were to be responsive, agile, effective global operations in the 21st century.
And it's definitely something that shouldn't just be reserved for the upper echelons of the military. It should be widespread. So what are the pitfalls of not having this cross-cultural competency in the military?
Oh, well, some of the examples that I've in about a decade of doing this kind of work with the military, some of the examples we've used and folks have shared with me can literally be, a life or death matter, misunderstandings at checkpoints, for example, or being able to understand and interpret communications that might indicate danger or imminent attacks or things like that. So sometimes it's, really, ground level nitty gritty. You need to be able to understand this stuff. I mean, even at the most basic kind of military shoot, move, and communicate levels, communicate is a key component. Yeah, and at the more strategic level, we hear a lot, for example, in deterrence discourse about the potential and so-called near-peer conflict, the dangers of miscalculations. So some of those miscalculations could come from miscommunications and misunderstandings that, again, are more likely if one is not, and our strategic thinkers and leaders are not culturally competent. If we're not able to see things from various others' perspectives.
How can this cross-cultural competency help our airmen and our guardians be better at their jobs, not just when they're deployed, but in their everyday jobs?
Yeah, there was a recent op-ed by a retired three-star that sort of made the argument that thinking about diversity and inclusion was kind of a distraction to the military, and could be a detractor to readiness and that kind of thing. But to a culturally competent force, it's less a distraction and more about marshaling all the diverse talents that should be a strength within our own force, much less having to work by, with, and through foreign partners. So, most service members are not day to day on the front line in firefights and need to be able to work with and lead diverse teams. And the Air Force just this month published and defined airmen's foundational competencies like communication skills and flexibility, which is highlighted as particularly important for the future. Also includes fostering inclusion, strategic thinking, and again, being culturally competent helps us communicate and include diverse partners, and considering history and cultural context, and those kind of more human or social dynamics makes us better strategic thinkers, able to anticipate effects of and reactions to our various activities. So cultural competence makes us better internally as an organization, stateside, in addition to, when deployed in a foreign country and working with foreign partners downrange.
Now, the Air Force Culture and Language Center has several unique educational opportunities for culture education. Can you speak a little bit to those that types of training that can help our airmen and our guardians?
Sure. We've had 2 courses online for a while they've been there a while, but they've been updated at the Community College of the Air Force. Intro to Culture and CrossCultural Communication. We also have a number of courses and country field guides on our app.
Which
resources
has also been updated recently.
Yes. And those are available to everyone. As faculty here at the CLC, we also tailor courses and modules for various groups to prepare for assignments and deployments. For example, through our pre-assignment acculturation courses, which we've done for general officers or chiefs or other commanders and command teams, and other personnel up and down the chain. We've done LREC or language, regional, and culture sessions for the 435th Air Expeditionary Wing, for example, for folks deploying to Africa. Another group of us have done International Aircrew Cultural Training, or Interact, with a NATO AWACS unit, which helps us communicate and operate better with our NATO partners. And our faculty, teach in the 10-month schools here at Air University, at Air War College, ACSC. So if you're here for PME, look us up. But we have a mission to support this kind of language and culture training and education throughout the total force. So that could be the courseware and the courses I've just mentioned, and the remote teaching we've done through our various packs. But this could also look like, mobile training teams. I've done a couple sessions in tents in Niamey and Agadez, for example. And this could take the form of, beyond what we might typically think of as teaching a course. For a couple of years, for example, we supported the 505th Combat Training Squadron for Blue Flag, which is the Air Force's premier exercise for training air op centers and in multi-domain or joint all-domain command and control. And we designed sort of injects that challenged and tested decision-making and processes regarding cultural property protection during conflict, as well as other more kind of civ mil coordination and social cultural dilemmas more broadly. So wargaming exercises can be great kind of beyond the classroom ways to, quote unquote, train like we fight, and to make sure we integrate these more social cultural considerations throughout operational planning, and at the speed of war and conflict, so that when these things come to pass, we can more productively, hopefully deter and prevent or mitigate or even shorten such conflicts by being culturally competent, by planning for culture, so that we don't exacerbate or do things that are counterproductive.
It sounds like you definitely stay busy, sir. If you had to sum up the most important aspect of culture on your biggest takeaway so far from your cultural studies and training, what would that be?
Nobody knows it all. Everything that one needs to know when they're preparing for deployment, when they're planning for operations, is not in the bullets of an intel brief or in the policy paper written in DC. or contained in our own field guides. Nobody can sort of package it all up and hand it to you. We have to develop, and the best anthropology, the best ethnographies are written exploring the various positions and perspectives of a whole range of actors. So and we have to develop that kind of cultural competence, regional knowledge, in collaboration and conversation with a diverse range of partners and interlocutors. So to anticipate the effects of any of our activities, we have to see things from a variety of perspectives. And that's a career spanning, that's a lifelong process that we are highly interested and invested in enabling and supporting here at AFCLC.
We have a couple of questions for you, if you're ready.
Sure.
We have Sophia, who is also a LEAP scholar. She would like to know what academic sources, such as a book or paper, would you recommend to read to understand interoperability in the realm of a specific study?
Oh, wow. Let's see. That's a good question. I wish I could have prepared some more specific, handouts for you. I think a lot of it is it does depend on the specifics of where you're going. That might look a little differently depending upon which region you're going to, what your role may be, what the job entails in terms of interaction with local partners, and what that might mean. So I mean, we have a lot of just an example. We have some we have courses and we're producing videos for our app that can be primers for certain countries or things to consider when we're thinking about culture. But
Do you
yeah,
happen to have any favorites as far as cultural general would go? Any favorite reads?
Favorite culture general read. I mean, I've just my advice typically is wherever you're going, find a leading anthropologist that has done field work there on the ground for an extended period of time. Read their book, read their ethnographies. I tend to think more, and I think that thinking more in those kind of concrete terms and specific terms is more helpful for folks versus general theories about culture.
Sophia, I know that you've joined us by Facebook, so if you'll drop an email to the outreach org box, we can get your specific question to Dr. Edmondson. We have another question here from Clive, and his question is, while learning about the culture of a nation with which we engage is essential, the ability to work effectively within that culture, cross-cultural communication, to achieve our nation's ends and those of our partner nation is even more critical. Many seek to teach cross-cultural communication exclusive of second language proficiently. My belief has always been that for cross-cultural communication to be effective, it must be learned jointly within the context of a higher level of linguistic competence. Could you speak to this?
I'm sorry, I think you broke up a little.
Did I break up?
Yeah.
It sounds like he's asking if he said his belief has always been that for cross-cultural communication to be effective, it must be learned jointly within the context of a higher level of linguistic competence. Could you speak to that? And speaking with cross-cultural communication as well.
So that means having a higher level of competence or even fluency in a particular language. And I do think that the deeper you get into language learning, and in addition to just sort of rote memorization of things, which, you know, some of language learning involves that, just having to drill on certain things. But when you learn it towards a view of trying to understand how it communicates a certain worldview, how language kind of frames any particular concept, and particularly working through translations and seeing where certain concepts or certain ideas don't neatly translate across cultures. Those are the things that you can kind of concentrate on, and because those are some of the maybe gaps that we need to bridge with cultural competence. So with being able to kind of try to see it through another culture's or another language's perspective or framing of any given concept or idea.
We have quite a few folks here with us in the center as well who've joined us. Does anyone have a question for Dr. Edmondson that they would like to ask and unmute? Well, I thought I heard somebody unmute. I can't tell.
Dr. Edmundson, this is Scott Alford. Do you have a favorite anecdote story that you maybe personally or heard secondhand from somebody involving a potential situation that arisen because of a conflict in the cultures and misunderstanding?
Yeah, I mean, I'll give an example of from one of the tougher classrooms I've taught in, which was at the Special Warfare Center School at Bragg. There were some folks that didn't think that they needed to learn about culture. We were trying to say that we were kind of being naive. And one soldier gave an example of how, he was trying to drink tea and build rapport and do all that kind of stuff. And it turned out that the very people that they were having those engagements with were responsible for, IEDs that almost blew up one of the convoys he was in. So he was sort of making the comment to say, hey, we can't just we can't just be all puppies and rainbows again about this. We can't be too Barney about it. But another officer stepped in and told a story about how he was out on patrol, and because they had someone with them that could understand what was being said around them, what was being said through other forms of communication through a loudspeaker, got them out of harm's way and saved his entire team's life. So those are kind of the more, again, those kind of life or death issues are sort of some of the more poignant examples. But even when we think about kind of at the more strategic level, designing, multi-trillion-dollar campaigns, if those are done without the kind of understanding of the places and the people where we're going, those kind of designs can tend to be more counterproductive and wasteful in general. So, I think that it's both kind of can be life or death at the tactical issue, but it can also be the difference between an effective or an ineffective strategy.
Do we have any other questions for Dr. Edmondson? Okay. Dr. Edmondson, thank you so much for taking time out of your day.
Laura, if you will, if
Sure.
in terms of culture general, or kind of to understand what cultural competence is in general for the military, I did think of, wanted to give a shout out to one of our colleagues, Louise Rasmussen, and her colleagues that have done a lot of this research for the Defense Language and National Security Education Office, Delencio. And they've conducted a lot of interviews with folks from various services at various ranks about their deployments and intercultural engagements, and coded that data and done the analysis and come up with 12 kind of characteristics of what makes someone culturally competent in a military context. So that's kind of every time we do a course, we reference that in terms of the best that I've seen come out of DoD research or research in the U.S. military context. We're trying to define and sketch out what this looks like for our personnel.
Okay, well, thank you very much, sir. Thank you so much for joining us today. I know you've had a very busy day, but we appreciate you spending some time with us.
It's a pleasure. And if there's any other questions, don't hesitate, folks, to reach out.
Will do. And I'd also like to take a moment just to say thank you to my outreach partner behind the scenes, Ms. Michaela McCurry. And many thanks to all of those who joined us either here in the center or on Facebook Live. And as always, we are the Air Force's Global Classroom. And a reminder, we'll have another episode next month, and we are AFCLC.